My name is Dana, and I'll be your event specialist today. At this time, I'd like to welcome everyone to the GDF Suez Energy Resources webinar, Where Electricity and Power Prices Are Headed, and Historical Pricing Data. After Mr. Weissman's presentation on where electricity prices are headed, you'll learn tips for how to use the GDF Suez online historical data feature to your advantage. We will conclude the webinar with a question and answer session. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. Please note that today's web conference is being recorded. We have a diverse audience in this webinar session. Participants include energy buyers from small businesses all the way up to Fortune 100 companies. Additionally, we have many third-party consultants and brokers online with us today. With over 300 registered, we're excited to have 150-plus participants joining us this morning. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that throughout the presentation, we invite you to submit your questions to the panelists. To ask the question, use the WebEx console, click on the chat panel icon. When you click on it, you should see a chat window where you can enter questions or comments. Type your question and click the send button, and your question will be in queue. We will address questions at the end of the program as time permits. Also, a copy of the presentation along with the question and answers will be sent to you after the webinar. If you experience any technical difficulties during today's event, please press *0 on your telephone keypad to be connected with the operator, or submit any issues using the chat panel at the bottom corner of the screen. Or for trouble with joining WebEx, please contact 1-866-229-3239 and select 1 on your keypad for WebEx technical support. In a minute, we will begin today's presentation, starting with Where Electricity and Power Prices Are Headed with speaker Andrew Weissman. Mr. Weissman is the publisher and editor-in-chief of Energy Business Watch and a GDF Suez insider on current electricity market issues. At this time, I'd like to turn today's program over to Andrew Weissman. Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Good morning to all of you. I appreciate very much your listening in. And also, I want to thank GDF Suez. I've had a close relationship with Suez for more than 2 years now, speaking at many events and writing a column for the On the Horizons publication that I hope some of you see, and it's been a very helpful relationship to me since it allows me to dive even more deeply into issues like those we're going to discuss today that I think are of importance to all of you. If we can move to the second slide, please. Just touch on my background for literally just a second. The relevant parts are, first of all, that I've been working on issues pertaining to the power markets and the natural gas markets really for my whole professional career. And one particular experience that may be worth noting today is that I helped pioneer the concept of emissions trading in the United States under Title IV of the Clean Air Act, where I arranged almost all of the early purchases and sales of allowances. I think that may be a particularly pertinent experience today because it gave me a real feel for what happens when new emissions trading programs are instituted. If we can switch to slide 3, please. The core message that I have to give today is really very pointed and I think very important. And it's one that I seldom give. And what it is that this is a time to act. That I would urge all of you who are end users to review your supply portfolios immediately and consider either covering requirements that are still open or locking in prices sometime very soon. And I say that for 2 reasons. We're really faced with a very unusual circumstance right now, and it does create a lot of uncertainty, but that uncertainty is precisely the reason why I would urge all of you to go forward. On the one hand, natural gas prices are literally collapsing as we speak. Cash market prices were down to about $3.20 at Henry Hub yesterday, and the front month futures contract is trading near $3.40 a million BTU. That's the lowest set of prices that we've seen in almost a decade. And reason for that, I think probably all of you are aware of, which is that we have an unprecedented supply glut of natural gas that's driving natural gas prices extremely low, and it's having a direct, powerful effect on electricity prices, which are also at a very low point compared to historical norms. And so this is certainly, in that sense, a very attractive time to act. But just as significantly, and this really will be the main focus of the presentation today, this is also a time when there is a really major risk that prices will escalate soon. And that risk stems from the cross-state air pollution rule, a new set of EPA requirements that we're going to discuss in depth this morning. If we can move to slide 4, please. I thought that it might be helpful to start by recapping what's happened during 2011. And in a sense, what's happened in 2011 is quite remarkable, and it too is a function of the huge supplies of natural gas that are currently available to the U.S. market. Specifically, on the one hand, we've seen very high weather-driven demand almost all year long, and on the other hand, we've seen moderate and stable prices for electricity. If you look, as I'm sure all of you who live in the Northeast or portions of the West recognize that, and still may be feeling some of the frigid air, the winter was very harsh, and that was followed in most of the country. Particularly, Texas really had a awful problem to deal with this summer, but all over the country we had a brutally hot summer. And of course, what we would ordinarily expect under those circumstances is that we might see some pretty severe electricity price spikes. But the two graphs on this page show you a little bit more about what happened. The bar chart on the right shows that on the left shows that by historical standards, the cooling degree days this last summer were matched only the year before nationally, then that they were far in excess of what we've ever experienced historically until the last 2 years. If you look on the right, that shows you prices in PJM. And on the the prices for this past year are represented in the black line, and the gray area shows you the range over the last 5 years. Of course, we had some price spikes on some of the very hottest days during the summer, but the price spikes were less frequent than usual and less severe, and even during the summer months, prices were towards the low end of the historical range. And Alex will be speaking later about Suez's really great new website, which contains historical information that will allow you to drill down into even greater depth on what's been happening historically. And the reasons for this are that both natural gas prices and coal prices really were very steady all year long. If we can move to the next slide, please. The most notable exception to this general pattern of really moderate pricing was in Texas. As I think all of us are aware, the heat this summer in Texas was literally off the charts. The bar chart on the left gives you a sense. The bar on the far right of that bar chart on the left shows you the cooling degree days for 2011, for the summer of 2011 in Texas. And as you can see, just they really jump off the chart as being far in excess of anything that was experienced previously, with all-time record temperatures in large parts of Texas during the summer. And that did lead to some pretty significant price spikes, and there were special conditions that made those particularly acute, and that's pretty painful because the prices for electricity that are paid for anyone exposed to spot market prices, when prices spike that high, the costs for electricity are so high that they cancel out. They largely offset lower prices during much of the year, but for much of the rest of the year, electricity prices in ERCOT were also very attractive. If we can switch to the next slide, please. So what should we expect in 2012? Well, here the story is going to get considerably more complicated now. And the reason it's going to get considerably more complicated is that we're in a situation where there are two potential paths that the market may follow in 2012. And they are as different as night and day. One I've called the business as usual kind of scenario, and that's essentially what we would expect to happen if the cross-state air pollution rule does not become effective. And the other is the probably more likely scenario in which EPA's new rule does go into effect, in which we could see very high prices for electricity and the kind of volatility, price volatility that we haven't seen for several years now. Now let's start by reviewing the situation that we all hoped we would be in, where electricity prices are really at extremely low levels. What's driving that is the factors listed on this slide. First is that we do have adequate generating capacity in most regions of the country. Second, that compared to the really harsh weather that we've had in 2011, the odds are at least that weather-driven demand will not be as strong. And thirdly, and the main part of the story, is the natural gas story. You're all familiar with that, so I won't dwell on it, but if you look at the graph on the left, what we've seen is a phenomenal continuing increase in U.S. onshore production of natural gas. And natural gas, of course, price of natural gas is basically what drives electricity prices during peak hours. That supply increase is exactly what's driven prices for natural gas so low now. And we believe that at least for the next 3 to 6 months, we're likely to see production continuing to increase. Now, the graph shows you the onshore production. That's not the only component of U.S. supply. There's also offshore production in the Gulf, LNG imports and pipeline imports, and those have been declining, and they probably will decline more during 2012, but they're not declining nearly enough to offset this huge huge increase in supply in in onshore production. Now, this increase has been occurring for a number of years now, and what's significant about it is how it compares to market needs. Because essentially, where we are right now is that we already at the beginning of 2011 had way more natural gas than we would have needed to supply the needs of the market in a normal weather kind of scenario. That of course is a big part of what's pushed electricity and natural gas prices down. But what's also important to recognize is just how unusual the weather conditions have been over the course of really the last 2 years. So if you look at the graph on the right of this page, what this is showing you is the above normal demand for natural gas that resulted from the very cold winters and the very, very hot summers. the increased demand that's occurred really since the very end of 2009 is really very startling. This graph shows what it is on a cumulative basis, and what it shows is that over that period of just under 24 months, we've had 1.8 trillion cubic feet of above normal weather-driven demand for natural gas. And that's been both weather-driven demand for natural gas for space heating and the major increases in use of natural gas for electric generation that occur in very hot weathers. And that is a truly startling figure. What it indicates is that if we had had more normal weather over the last 2 years, the market would have had delivered to it potentially as much as 1.8 trillion cubic feet. Excuse me, let me rephrase that to be a little bit clearer. Essentially, in terms of the net supply excess, if we had had more normal weather, if that demand shown in the graph on the right had not occurred, essentially the market would have had to absorb 1.8 trillion cubic feet of additional natural gas. And that's an overwhelming figure. The figure could have been even higher if we'd had relatively mild weather. But even at 1.8 trillion cubic feet, if the market had to absorb that much additional natural gas, it undoubtedly would have seen some pretty severe further downward pressure on natural gas prices, and that would have had just a major effect on electricity prices really in every part of the country. The on-peak prices, particularly in the summer, would have been even lower than they have been. And that's critical, because if you put these two graphs together, they tell a pretty startling story. And what the story is that production is continuing to increase. So the oversupply condition in the market is even greater now than it would have been at the beginning of 2011. And it could continue to get more extreme during the first several months of 2012. So we are, in the next 12 months, we are going to have even more supply than we've had in the past 12 months. And if we have more normal weather, and the extra demand shown in the graph on the right doesn't occur, then we'll have even more than 1.8 trillion cubic feet of natural gas to absorb. And if we have that, that's really a recipe for some of the lowest prices we've seen in many years. And so that's exactly why we're seeing particularly moderate electricity prices now, and why we're seeing natural gas prices sink as low as they have. And there's no question, I want to be clear as part of this presentation, that prices could go even lower, and maybe even significantly lower. But the question is, how much risk do you want to take in terms of waiting to capture an opportunity to get even lower prices than we have now, and especially how much risk do you want to take given the situation I'm about to describe next, where we have where this EPA rule could cause prices to quite suddenly jump very sharply. If we can move to the next slide, please. And this really gives you an even more vivid sense of the extent of the supply increase that we have. If you look at the graph to the left, the most important line on that graph is the orangish kind of line. And what that's showing is essentially that the gray area shows is that U.S. production has been increasing all year long during 2011. And if you look at the right of that gray area, you'll see it's right at the orange line. Well, that's the level that we're at. And so if we start the clock again and you look at the left-hand side and you think of that as showing us what supply will be in 2012, then just holding supplies at constant levels will lead to much higher supplies of natural gas in January of 2012 than in January of 2011. And the increase in supplies will be the difference between the gray area and the orange area. That's more than over the course of the year. If production just stays constant, supplies of natural gas are going to increase by potentially 900 BCF or more. They'll increase even further if supplies continue to grow. We've illustrated that with the blue line. So that creates an enormous amount of additional natural gas, even if weather in 2012 is identical to 2011. That would result in downward pressure in prices. If weather is milder, and that 1.8 trillion cubic feet of missing demand, of extra demand in 2010 and 2011 is missing, then the downward pressure could become really very severe. And the graph at the right gives you a good sense of what that means. Really, we see the market as being driven, both the electricity and natural gas markets, is really being driven by the amount of excess natural gas, and we see the market as functioning in a way that assures that storage stays at reasonable levels. And to do that, we're going to have to absorb an awful lot more natural gas this winter. We can move to the next slide, please. We've just gone over the scenario we all hope will happen, where prices come under more severe downward pressure. We're going to spend really the rest of the presentation talking about what we think is the more likely scenario in which EPA's new cross-state air pollution rule goes into effect in all or most of the states that are covered under the terms of EPA's rule. And if it goes into effect, it's going to have a really severe impact, and it is scheduled to go in effect almost immediately. It starts by January 1st, and so we could see the sudden change in the market I'm about to describe as early as about 6 weeks from now. And that's why I started my presentation by talking about the importance of reviewing your supply portfolio immediately. If we can move to the next slide. This slide gives you the basics on what the new EPA rule does. Many people have called EPA's new rule, it's often referred to as CSAPR, is an acronym for Cross-State Air Pollution Rule. Many people have called it the most important new set of EPA restrictions in more than 2 decades. And what it does is that it requires further reductions in emissions in the states that are colored in on the map. And specifically, the goal of the program is to deal with the impact of interstate pollution with emissions from power plants in the middle part of the country, blowing across the country, and making it more difficult for the downwind states to achieve compliance. We're dealing with 2 health standards. They're the health standards for ozone and for fine particulates. The precursors of ozone include NOx, emissions of nitric oxides. Fine particulates are caused by both NOx and SO2. And so the new EPA rule aims to reduce emissions in upwind states of both SO2 and NOx to facilitate compliance with the federal air quality standards for ozone and fine particulates. Most of the states that are subject to the program are subject to all the different components. Some are subject to only some of the components. The color code on the right gives you a sense of which sets of requirements apply in each state. and they're basically several separate requirements. One set of requirements are some requirements for reductions in annual SO2 emissions, and we'll go into those more in a minute. Those differ by time, and they're differ to some degree by state. Secondly, there is a restriction on annual emissions of NOx, and then there's also a third set of restrictions which are on emissions of NOx during the summer ozone season. This is an additional set of requirements over and above the annual NOx limitation, and it applies basically from May 1st to September 30th, which is the season, the part of the year in which ozone starts to become a real issue from a health standpoint. If we can move to the next slide, please. Now, the first question is obviously just how tough are the emission reduction requirements, and the basic answer is that they're very tough. And if you look at the table, this gives you the specifics in terms of the amounts of emission reductions. One thing that's quite important to pay attention to is the way in which the SO2 restrictions are handled. And essentially, for that purpose, the states that are subject to the requirement to reduce emissions of SO2 are divided into two groups. The first group is the group in the reddish-pinkish kind of color, and they're called the Group 1 states for SO2 purposes, and that basically includes almost the whole Northeast, and almost all the states with heavy use of coal and high emissions, except for Texas and part of the Southeast. The Group 2 states are more distant from the areas which have not yet attained federal ambient air quality standards, and they are subject to a different set of requirements. And the NOx requirements apply to most of the country. And the map on the last page, excuse me, on the previous slide, again tells you exactly what applies where. Now, one question, the way this program works is that it is kind of a classic cap-and-trade program. Essentially, there are limits put on allowable emissions. What EPA does is that it'll be issuing allowances that exactly equal the cap on total emissions. And then the key feature of cap-and-trade programs will be the allowances are issued to generators, but generators, at least in theory, have the option of potentially buying allowances from other utilities that receive emissions under the program. And so the idea is that the total cost of compliance can be minimized by the utilities, by generators with who can reduce their emissions below the number of allowances issued specifically to that generator, will overcomply, will reduce below their number of allowances and have excess allowances, and that they will sell them to utilities to generators that are likely to have a harder time complying, and that will enable those generators to emit at somewhat higher levels and therefore avoid some of their most expensive reduction measures. Now, how can you comply with the requirements? So first of all, it really is important to recognize that there are literally 4 entirely separate cap-and-trade programs, and each generator has to comply separately with each of the programs that are applicable to it. If you are in a Group 1 SO2 state, for example, the Group 1 states as a group have to comply with the Group 1 cap, and they cannot trade SO2 allowances with the states that are in Group 2 and vice versa. and a similar pattern with NOx. If you're covered, you have to meet both the total annual NOx requirement and the ozone requirement, and they are separate programs, and there will be separate allowances for each. During the ozone season, essentially we'll have to use both an annual NOx allowance and an ozone season allowance, because you'll have to satisfy each of those two separate programs. In terms of the severity of the emission reduction requirements, for Group 1 in particular, Group 1 SO2 requirements, it's important to note that the requirements become stricter over time. As a reference point, emission levels last year for the Group 1 states were about 3.12 million tons of SO2. In 2012, when the program goes into effect, the emissions, the cap is set at just over 2.5 million, and what that means is that to achieve, to reduce total emissions sufficiently to get within the cap, there's going to have to be a total reduction of 600,000, almost 600,000 tons of SO2. But then in 2014, the cap is reduced very dramatically, and it's reduced to 1.357 million tons, and that will require that emissions be reduced by more than half of what the emissions were just last year. So they're pretty severe requirements. There have been a lot of steps taken which enable utilities to get within striking distance of the Group 1 cap for 2012, but there's still some pretty major emission reductions that will be required to achieve it. But the 2014 problem is really severe, and to meet 2014, a lot of the affected generators are going to have to reduce emissions significantly further during 2012 and 2013 to save some of the allowances that are allocated to them in 2012 and 2013 for use in 2014 and later years in order to ease the transition into the lower cap. So that's a particularly important feature of the program. And it's also one of the things that's really startling, because I've been working on cap and trade applicable to generators for quite a number of years now, is that we've had huge, by 2010, we'd already had huge reductions in SO2 emissions. The 2010 emissions were literally only about 20% of where they were when the cap and trade program started. The Title IV cap and trade program started in 1995. And the relevance of that, in part, is that what that means is that most power plants that are covered by this program already have reduced their emissions dramatically. Most of them already are scrubbed. And as a result of that, in obtaining and achieving the kinds of further reductions required here, it's far more difficult. The reason it's far more difficult is there are just not that many high-emitting plants that are left. And so that's very important in thinking about the impacts of this program. If we can move to the next slide. Now, as I mentioned, the whole notion behind this program is that the costs could be reduced by using a cap and trade program rather than setting an absolute inviolable limit for the emissions from any one generator. And the notion is that that will significantly reduce costs. Now, there's no question it will make a difference, and there's no question it will save costs, in large part because a company that owns a number of affected generating plants will have the option of reducing emissions, of using its own allowances internally in a way that minimizes system costs. But the problem is that with this particular program, notwithstanding the success of some earlier cap and trade programs, the likelihood is that in the early years, trading is going to be very minimal. So the likelihood of that the cost savings that EPA expected from cap and trade are going to be fully realized is not very high. That's for a number of reasons, but it's in part because this is not a nationwide program. There are only a relatively small number of companies in the affected states, and when you look at them, there are very few who are natural longs who are likely to have a significant number of allowances to sell, particularly the SO2 allowances, and there are many who are short by large amounts, have major shortages in 2012 and 2013, and at least right now, prior to implementing other measures to control emissions, are extremely short in 2014 and later. And so what you have, therefore, is a market in which there are many potential buyers and relatively few potential sellers. And there are a number of other problems as well. Even the companies that on paper look like sellers are going to act cautiously and probably hold on to a lot of their allowances in order to make sure, in order basically to create a reserve and to ease the transition into 2014. And that's going to reduce the number of allowances available for sale even more severely. And we think it's going to result in a very thin market with high price volatility. And we'll go into the specifics in a second. Just how tight the market will be is clearly going to be a function of the weather. And we'll talk about that more in a minute, too. If we can move to the next slide. What I want to emphasize here, and for the person controlling the slides, you may want to move back and forth to the next slide again because there's a graphic on it that appeared for a second, at least on my screen, and then disappeared. And what the graphic, we're almost there, but not quite, at least on my screen. The graphic is illustrating and not this one, the one on the next slide is illustrating, there it looks like it's showing up well this time. Great, that's terrific. Is that basically we're in a situation here where the volatility that's always associated with power markets potentially can be amplified a great deal in either direction. You know, in the past, if we look on the left, electricity prices are high when we have heavy electricity demand. That requires heavy dispatch of natural gas units. But in that scenario, a scenario like last summer when we had very hot weather really in all the Group 1 states and most of the Group 2 states, not only would we likely see high electricity demand and a need to use even the most efficient natural gas units, but we're also going to see high allowance prices, and we're also going to have to limit the use of the less expensive coal-fired units. And so in that scenario, we could see essentially 2 or 3 different factors forcing electricity and natural gas prices higher. And conversely, if we have mild weather, the effects will be somewhat more moderate, but as we'll see, even in a mild weather scenario, they're pretty significant. If we could move to the next slide. Now, specifically, I'm going to try to talk in some detail about exactly what the impacts of this program is. And the starting point is that this program is guaranteed to increase the dispatch cost for coal-fired units in every state covered by the program. And the reason is basically very simple. And so, as you'll see, one of the things that's certain to occur if this program goes into effect is that we're certain to see increases in power prices in every hour in which coal-fired generating plants are on the margin. In most regions, that includes all of the off-peak periods of the week and some of the on-peak periods. And so this goes into effect in all the covered states. We're definitely going to see price increases. Now, how great are they going to be? Let's move to the next slide. This gives you the specific numbers, and this is a complex slide, and the reason it's a complex slide is that the extent to which this increases dispatch cost for coal-fired units is going to depend on many factors. It's definitely going to depend heavily on weather, as we were just discussing. It will depend on allowance prices, and it will depend on allowance prices, which in turn will, in substantial part, also be a function of weather. In addition, however, it's important. It will be affected by the characteristics of the marginal unit needed to meet load, and particularly by the sulfur content of the coal that's used in those plants, and by the emission rates for SO2 and NOx. And so what the grid, the tables below are showing you is a range of potential scenarios as to just what the price impact could be. And if you look at the SO2 adder, that shows in the left-hand column 3 different potential allowance prices. We think allowance prices are going to be somewhere in the range of $2,500 for much of next year. They may start lower because the full impact of the program may not be recognized immediately, but we think they're very likely they'll be above $2,000. What does that mean in terms of prices? Well, it depends what the marginal unit is. If the marginal unit turns out to be a unit that burns Powder River Basin coal with a sulfur content in the 0.7 pound range, that will be sufficient to cause the dispatch cost for coal-fired units to increase from current levels by roughly $9 per megawatt hour. So we're not talking about a small impact. We're talking about plants that sometimes are dispatched at $25 to $30 a megawatt hour, sometimes even lower. And the dispatch costs for those plants are going to go up probably by at least that much. If the marginal unit is a 1 pound unit, it's a $13 increase. There are going to be a lot of periods of the year in which the marginal unit will probably have an even higher sulfur content, so that the adder will be even larger. And there's also a very substantial risk that allowance prices periodically will be significantly above $2,500. Some people have speculated that they could occasionally spike to as high as $10,000. Basically, the impact of that on wholesale prices for coal-fired generation are so extreme we didn't even want to show them, because it's almost hard to take it seriously when the impacts are that extreme. The middle column shows you the effect of the NOx adders. The top rows in all 3 of these tables are using EPA's estimated allowance prices. We think prices will be higher. If you look at the table to the right and look in the first row of numbers, the ones that uses EPA's allowance prices, even with EPA's allowance prices, when you add the effects of the multiple adders combined, we think we're seeing at least a $7 to $10 increase in prices. And in the more likely scenario, in which prices are closer to the second row, we could easily see prices that increase in the range of $15 to $20 a megawatt hour. If we can move to the next slide. We've just discussed the impact on coal. The real guts of this program, the real problem, though, is the impact that it's going to have on the prices of natural gas and on peak prices for electricity. And this is a little bit complicated story, so bear with me. But basically, if you look at the first table, if you look at the graph on that page, what that's showing you is that what has been setting natural gas prices on most days for the last couple of years. And those natural gas prices are the single most important determinant of on-peak electricity prices. There's been competition between natural gas-fired generation and coal-fired generation. Basically, the only way to absorb all that excess natural gas is for the price of natural gas to fall low enough so that use of natural gas-fired generating units increases sufficiently to turn off an increasing amount of coal-fired generation, or at least ratchet back the utilization. And to do that, because of the amount of excess gas, natural gas prices have had to fall further and further. And basically, the reason why we had a 320 price at Henry Hub yesterday is essentially that's how far prices had to fall for the use of natural gas-fired generation to be cheap enough so that it displaced enough coal-fired generation and increased natural gas-fired generation sufficiently to balance the market. Now, if we can move to the next slide, please. What does that mean in terms of natural gas prices? Now, this is probably, and therefore the impact on electricity prices. If we can move to the next slide, that essentially could easily, if you look at the columns there and look at the middle row in particular, and so we're talking about a very significant impact. And it makes the problem even worse is that none of us really know where all this is going to settle out. Because the market is so thin, we're likely to see much more price volatility, and we definitely could more than occasionally see electricity prices spike even higher. Now, a last point, if we can move to the next slide, a last point in terms of this impact, and again, we may need to toggle this a little bit for the graphic to show up. So if the person controlling the slide could do that, let's see if we can get the graphic to appear. Otherwise, you all can look at it later. Everybody nationally will be affected by increases in natural gas costs that will increase electricity prices nationwide. If we can move to the final text slide, the next slide. I'm going to end exactly where I started. There's also some possibility to be stayed in the other Group 2 states, but we think there's a pretty high likelihood it'll go into effect in the Group 1 states. We're potentially talking about a major jarring change that's going to occur almost immediately. If we can move to the very last slide, please. I hope that this presentation has helped elucidate what we're all going to be facing. It is very complex. I'm sure that many of you have questions. Some of them have already been entered online. There's time to add more. If we're not able to get to all your questions today, though, please don't hesitate to contact me. We've been advising all the electricity customers we work with to immediately review their supply portfolios, and we're glad to give you some more input to help guide you as to what actions might be necessary. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back to the operator so that we can move to Alex's presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Weissman. Now we will hear from Alex Benedict, the Manager of Marketing Analytics at GDF Suez. He will discuss tips for how to use the GDF Suez online historical data feature, including the new web app for historical data pricing. At this time, I'd like to turn the program over to Alex Benedict. Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. And also, thank you so much to Andy for providing such great insights. I really think we're on the right track here, and actually we're running out of time, so we're probably going to have to limit the questions at the end to 1 or 2 answers. But what I'm here to talk about today is 2 new services that we're offering from GDF Suez Energy Resources. The first is our new historical mobile app that allows you to download historical electricity pricing to your smartphone. Also, we just recently unveiled our new website in January, and we've been working hard to get some enhancements rolled out that allow those who visit our site to explore market prices in the territories that we serve. As such, I'm going to walk you through these recently developed enhancements that will allow you to download those prices, including hourly, daily, weekly, and monthly day-ahead and real-time data for those utilities, and hopefully you can use that in your own data and analysis. We think these are both pretty cool tools, so let's get started with the mobile app. Since we're a bit short on time, I wanted to let you know before we begin that we'll be sending out instructions after this webinar on how to download the historical price app to your smartphone. Just make sure you have an iPhone or an Android smartphone. We currently don't actually have any app for the Windows smartphones or for BlackBerry. So here we have our launch screen. We've got our little app icon on the iPhone on the left-hand side there. And when you click that, this is on the right what you see. And once the app is fully loaded, you're going to be presented with a selection of the 5 different ISOs where GDF Suez Energy Resources operates. Once you select your ISO, you'll be taken to a screen that shows the 3 main parameters that you can search by, which is right there in the middle. You can select by zone or utility. You can select data type, which is hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, day ahead, or real time, and finally, a date range. Once you make your criteria selections and hit the Fetch Data button at the bottom, the information is returned to your phone so you can quickly review the trends for the given utility that you selected. This is a really useful app for people that are out in the field or in a meeting without having to dig out a laptop. It's a really quick tool. Since it's mainly used via cellular network, we did optimize the speed of the app by limiting the download of data to 1 utility at a time and restricted the hourly data to 24 hours worth of prices, daily pricing to 8 days, weekly pricing to 8 weeks, and monthly pricing to 7 months. So again, that's just to ensure that the download times to your phone remain speedy and consistent. One last time, we will definitely be sending out instructions on how to install that after this webinar. Secondly, I wanted to introduce our historical prices on our website. This has been a good 8 months in the making, so we're really excited about our efforts and I hope that you guys are too. I'm just going to leave the webinar real quick to share our desktop so I can show you real quick how to use it. So the web address is www.gdfsuezpricing.com. And what you see when you click on that link is a website similar you can see to our mobile app. We've got our 5 different ISOs. And you just click to choose the one that you're interested in. In this case, I'm going to choose PJM since it's right here at first. And again, similar to the web app, you can choose your zone, you can choose your data type, and you can choose your date range. I'm probably going to be interested right now just because I'm feeling like it, Pennsylvania. So I'm going to choose MEDED, PPL, and PICO. And I want to see what it's been like monthly for day ahead and real time for the past year. So I'm going to go here and you can do a little drop down for the dates. I'm going to choose November 2010 and just click the first here. And then I want to go to today so I can see November of this month. And then all I do is I hit search. And depending on how much data you select, it depends on how long the download time is going to be. This is a fairly small data set, just 12 months here. So you can see here at the top you've got the day ahead, and at the bottom you've got real time. The cool thing about this that's different from our enhancements from our previous website is that you can download to analyze the prices. So if I click on Download CSV here, you'll be presented with a disclaimer, and you just click that to go forward. You click Open, and you can see the dates here. So just to provide a graphical analysis, in Excel it's pretty cool. You just have to highlight your data and just click Graphs, Charts, and then you can see visually exactly where prices are going. So it's a pretty robust tool. We're, like I said, pretty excited about it. Again, if you have any questions after this, please, by all means, send me an email. My email address will be sent out with the instructions to download the historical web app for your iPhone or Android smartphone. And with that, I think we can go forward and answer any questions that we might have for Andy or myself.
Now we'll begin answering a couple questions. Once again, you can enter questions at the right of your screen in the chat window. We will send out questions and answers after this presentation. It is likely that we will not get to all the questions asked in this presentation, but we will answer them in a written part of the presentation. You will receive the written Q&A via email. Alex or Andy?
Andy, do you want to take our first question? Okay. Well, Andy, I guess he's not on right now, but I can take a question here. Do I have to be a GDF Suez customer to use the online pricing tool, or is it free? It's free, again, to anyone who wants to visit our website. You can either go to www.gdfsuezenergyresources.com or to gdfsuezpricing.com. And again, I have another question here. How long does it take to download the data from the website's historical pricing tool? It depends on the data criteria that you select. If you choose a lot of different utilities within an ISO with pretty significant date ranges, what's going to happen is obviously the data set is going to be pretty big. It can take a minute or two to download, but as you saw in the example that I did, it was pretty quick. We have another one. Do you have any tools for us to chart actual usage historically? Well, the data that is provided on the website that we just visited is all historical data, and you can download that into Excel like I did and use that to analyze the historic prices. It depends on your Excel skills, but I'm happy to at least walk people through the process since we had to blow through that real quick. If you need any advice, with that. Andy? We're just waiting for Andy. He's ready to answer a few questions.
Okay, great. Let me take at least a couple. My understanding is that there's been basically a flood of questions. Appears to be a lot of interest in this topic, and as I mentioned before, we're eager to give you whatever guidance might be helpful. My understanding is that essentially what Suez is going to do is that every question that's submitted, we will answer. We're going to put it, Suez will be putting it up on a website, and I will answer all those questions as best I can, and that will be posted sometime soon. So let me take at least a couple of the questions, though. One question from Grant. Why would production of natural gas continue to increase if demand was so low compared to the excess supply? Let me say a couple things about that. One is that the effect, if this program goes into effect, there will be an increase in natural gas demand. No one knows for sure how much it will be. We believe actually that what's going to happen within 3 or 4 months after the program starts, that essentially every currently underutilized combined cycle unit in the covered states is likely to be far more fully utilized. And the reason we think that is that whether or not that's necessary to comply with the 2012 cap, we think that utilities will take advantage of the opportunity to overcomply in 2012 and 2013 to build up a bank of allowances, and that whenever there's combined cycle capacity available, they'll be sorely tempted to use it. That would increase demand by potentially something in the range of 2.5 to 3 BCF a day. Now that, at least initially, still won't be sufficient to absorb all the excess natural gas. And I should mention, just for those, in terms of natural gas prices, we've had another further decline today. Oil prices are substantially over $100 a barrel, 101.37 right now. Natural gas has dropped down the December contract to 337. Really pretty incredibly low prices, and they could continue to drop for the next several months. During that period, certainly without Casper, we would expect natural gas prices to continue to go down. Now, in terms of Grant's question, why wouldn't the producers respond to that? Well, the short answer is, on the one hand, they will, but on the other hand, it will take a significant time period before the cutbacks in drilling start to have an effect. And even when they do, we're in a severely oversupplied market, so the effect of the initial cutbacks will just be to cause production to plateau. And so it could take, even an extreme, even without Casper, it could take the better part of a year before we start to see a sufficient decline in natural gas consumption for the market to come into equilibrium. If Casper goes into effect and we see that increase in the break-even point between natural gas and coal, and we see an increase in demand for natural gas, the price signal is going to be higher, and that, if anything, might tempt producers to continue to keep drilling at current levels or even expand it. And that the market will roughly be in balance if whether in that scenario in which Casper goes into effect, the market might be roughly in balance for a while if weather is extreme. If weather is more normal, then we could still have significant price drops. So maybe I'll try to cover a few of the questions that are pending. In this one response, I think what it underscores is that we're moving into a situation where there's going to be, where if Casper goes into effect, as we think it will in most of the covered states, there is just going to be a greater uncertainty than we've seen in a very long time because of the thin allowance market, the potential, we think the likelihood for both natural gas and electricity prices to go very significantly, and for sure what we're likely to see is much greater price volatility, and it's for all those reasons that when we look at actually natural gas prices are continuing to decline as we speak. It's the December contract is down almost 4 cents right now, and this set of circumstances causes us to feel that all of you ought to be reviewing your supply portfolios and consulting with your suppliers immediately in order to take advantage of current very attractive prices and also protect against the risks. So why don't I keep within the time limits? Why don't I end up now? I want to emphasize again that Suez has very kindly agreed to take all the questions that any of you post during the call now, or if you want to email questions in later today, that's fine too. It may take us a little while to respond to all of them given the number of questions we have, but we will, and I'm sure Suez will give you instructions as to how you'll be able to access the answers online. So thank you all again for your listening in today, and I hope this presentation is helpful, and we're going to be covering these issues in depth throughout the next year in the market analysis that we prepare on a weekly basis, that we'll be more than happy in the near term to answer whatever questions you have. Thank you all very much, and let me turn it back to the operator now.
Thank you. We never like to end our webinars without mentioning we want to hear from our participants. You will be receiving a survey along with a recorded webinar, and we encourage you to take 5 minutes of your time to provide us with input on how we did and feedback on what you'd like GDF Suez to provide in future webinars to come. Thank you again for joining us today. Please call 866-999-8374 for any questions about your electricity needs, or if you are interested in receiving a quote from us in the future. This ends our formal presentation. You may now disconnect.